Let's take a look at assignment 2, question 6, the scatter diagram and correlation between stock prices here, just to give you a quick rundown on how to get these results that we have here. So we're going to use the stock price data. First thing, create a scatter diagram, which this is tricky in Excel. Sometimes just kind of getting familiar with it, and then calculate the covariance and the correlation coefficient. So I'll check out our data right here. The first thing is to do our scatter diagram. And the way Excel works, if you wanted to, we could, it's default, if we have two columns of data that we're going to use this time, its default is to put this on the x-axis, the first column, and the Netflix would be on the y-axis, the second column. And I think if we're checking this out, we want an Apple on the X and Netflix on the Y. Now, there's going to be cases where your data is not organized like that. So just in case, let me show you how to kind of just input those just generally. We'll go to Insert, and then we're looking for the scatter diagrams. And if you're using something different, I think it might be a little bit different if you're using the Office 365. And also, I know we don't do it in our class much, but like Google Sheets would do this too. It's just the idea is the same, just it's slightly different the way they've organized things in the sheets. But we're looking for the scatter diagram. If you hover over this, it does say scatter to. I haven't selected anything this time since I just want to generate a blank chart, and I'm just going to keep these dots right here. All right. Once you have this, what we want to do is populate the chart. You can select data with our chart. When our chart is activated here, you can notice like here's a select data option. If you right click, we can select data, and there's several ways to kind of go about this, but that's the first step, is to put the data in that we're looking for. And when we get this, we get a new field list, and to kind of manipulate our data that we have here. Now specifically, we're going to generate a new series of values that we're looking for. And to do that, I'll just add. Okay, and now we get, for our series, we're just plotting one thing. If we were going to do multiple things, I would suggest put a name in here for this so that you can identify the different pieces. But with just one series, we know what it's going to be. So if I hit the button here, these are going to be our X values. I'm just going to come and select these here like this. And that's our Apple for our X values. And then I'll come here and hit this again and select this for our Y values. Always give your range a check. This is a source of a lot of frustration if you're new to Excel. If you notice before, there was like this weird bracket one, and that's like if you just want to index this. So there's kind of do this. So there's oftentimes when you're like editing this and you're going to get something like that. So if you ever get errors, possibly it's because there's something in here. If that's ever the case, you can just delete that, start over, and always just give your range a check to make sure that it looks right, that they kind of match up. Click OK. I think we're in good shape here. And we've got our scatter diagram that we're looking at here. And of course now we want to put, give it some kind of title, call it scatter plot. And there's many different ways you can do this, but it's Netflix, since that's our Y variable, versus Apple, or Netflix against Apple, something like that. And we might as well, just to be, complete, give it an axis title here too, just so that this is not a bad idea either, so that we don't forget, what is where. Okay. All right, let's see if we answered that question right there. Got that. We need to add a trend line, and then we can kind of talk about what that relationship looks like here too. To add the trend line, there's a couple different ways to do this. The trend line, as I'm thinking about this, I think Excel, there's like 3 ways to do one thing, every time. We can select our data and right-click to get the trend line. But also, if you wanted to, on the top left, when our chart's activated again, add chart element, I think we can find trend line here too. We'll always use a linear for our case. now we've got here. So you can get it there. If we right click, we should be able to add trend line here too. And I think if we're using this, our little plus sign, we can get a trend line here too. So there's 3 ways, which makes it confusing when you're trying to teach this to somebody. But again, remember what we're trying to get out of the class is just learning, and you're going to learn your way to do this best. So whatever works, best for you. The chart elements, trend line, it's all pretty similar, and you can kind of see that in there. The way our data is too, I like having the zeros in here to scale it appropriately so we can kind of see, but definitely all our data is like really bunched up together right here, and you can see that trend line, and you can manipulate this if you want to, kind of make it stand out a little bit more. To me, when I'm seeing this, it looks like there's a positive line, a positive relationship between Apple and Netflix. These are 2 big tech companies, so we would expect that they are going to have a positive relationship between them. Okay. All right, so I think that's good. So if you're describing it, looks like it's a positive relationship. We talk about the sign that it looks like they're positively related to each other, or possibly positively correlated. We're not saying causally, like they cause like one another, but there's definitely it looks like a correlation that's happening here positive wise. And this is true with our tech stocks that we've got, is that they do tend to kind of move together from what we see. All right, now I think the next one was, can we find the sample covariance? We can do that pretty easily, I think. Possibly, let me just check to make sure that's compute the sample covariance between Apple and Netflix, and then we'll do the correlation coefficient too. We'll kind of interpret those. All right, now the sample covariance, covariance.s is our function that we're using here. If you remember too, you might get some questions like on the test about this. The covariance can tell us the sign, but not necessarily the strength. And so that's why we're not going to use it too often. But we do need two columns of data to get this one, to see the relationship between the 2. That's the neat thing about this. We spent so much time on the numerical statistics for a single variable. Now we're looking at relationships between 2 things. Okay. All right. So what you want to do is just select the data for our Apple, and then make sure that you separate those arrays, or array is just the column of data. Separate it with a comma. All right, that comma right there. We should be in good shape, I think, to get our covariance value there. All right. Okay. We've got the sample covariance is positive. That's kind of consistent with what we expect right here, but then we want that correlation coefficient. So the correlation coefficient, I know the terms are always, it's interesting to see, but the correlation coefficient, this is the one we're probably more likely to see and more likely to use and interpret in the future. It's got a great interpretation that we have with it. So same thing here. I think it's Correl is the function that we're looking at here. And let me scroll up a little bit just to make sure everyone can see that. So equals Correl. It's the same idea. We got 2 columns of data. All right, I'm just gonna separate them with a comma. If you ever get errors with that, just make sure. It's always just check the range, check to make sure everything looks okay, and we'll get our correlation right here. So our correlation coefficient, again, it's always nice just to kind of clean these numbers up a little bit. Correlation coefficient of 0.26 kind of implies a moderate positive, it's positive, so maybe a moderate positive relationship, maybe not too strong, right? I'm not saying weak necessarily, but kind of closer moderate, closer to weak than not necessarily a really super strong relationship that we have. So they're correlated positively, but it's not a very strong correlation necessarily that we have here. Okay, so that's our sample covariance, that's our correlation coefficient, and let's see, is there anything else? Interpret this value in terms of the sign and strength of the relationship. Positive, that's all we're going to say right there. And we said again, moderate, it's not too strong. Is this consistent with our analysis in the scatter plot? Yeah, and you can always say here, this is just to get us to check it. it doesn't look, I mean, for me, it may be, I think it looks pretty consistent with what we saw before. It's not like terribly strong, but there's not a bad correlation happening here in our scatter plot. So you can say something like, it's okay to answer this question like, yeah, it's consistent with what I thought. Or if we thought it was a stronger relationship, say, well, now the correlation coefficient, it's not quite as strong as I thought, but it is still positive. Okay. All right. Hope this helps with any questions you might have. And definitely send me more emails if you're stuck on anything.